When I was 8 years old, I was tiny. I was skinny. I had thick Coke bottle glasses. I was the only brown kid at my public school in the suburbs of Toronto in the early to mid 1980s. And one day, my librarian, Mrs. Farrell, handed me a book. Maybe she could tell I was kind of like a lonely kid. I was a lonely kid. I don't really remember having friends. It wasn't something that 8-year-old me could really relate to. It was kind of a group of people to hang out with. And Mrs. Farrell handed me a book called Sideways Stories from Wayside School by Louis Sachar, S-A-C-H-E-R. The book completely changed me into a reader, single-handedly. I had never read a book before that was funny, that was absurd, that was written in this short, choppy style that kind of kept me flipping pages, flipping. I loved the book. I fell into the book, and it makes sense. I mean, I'm one of 9 million people who've picked up a copy of Sideways Stories from Wayside School. In the back of the Book of Awesome, the book I wrote in 2010, in the acknowledgments I wrote, to Louis Sachar for writing Sideways Stories from Wayside School and teaching a young, nerdy kid to fall in love with reading. We talk a lot about reading on this show, on this program, but it's not that often I actually get to sit down and talk to the person single-handedly responsible for turning me into a reader, and that is what we're going to do today. Welcome, everybody. Hello, how are you? Welcome back. Hi, Three Bookers. Hi, Cover to Cover Club members. We're here. It's the new moon. It's chapter 78 of 3 books. For those that are uninitiated, you are on our almost 15-year-long quest to uncover and discuss the 1,000 most formative books in the world for 333 straight lunar cycles on the exact minute of every single new moon and every single full moon from March 31st, 2018, all the way up to September 1st, 2031. We are dropping a conversation about which 3 books changed someone's life. Like back in chapter 20 when we were down in Brooklyn, New York. You guys remember we hung out with Debbie Stoller, the founder and editor of the world's largest feminist magazine. That would be Bust Magazine. We hung out with Debbie in the warehouse district with her dogs barking in the background. We had a lot of fun down in Brooklyn. How about chapter 42? You guys remember we were in the Four Seasons Hotel. Oh, the days of being in this giant suite at the Four Seasons, hanging out with the poker princess herself, Miss Molly Bloom. I caught up with her just before she was going on stage with Tony Robbins, and we talked about her starring in the film. Well, she's really the subject of the film, Molly's Game, but also her incredibly ridiculous life growing up as an Olympian skier and kind of translating that kind of view of success and of winning into running these illegal high-stakes poker games. And then, you guys remember chapter 66 where we hung out with Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. How did we land an interview kind of closing in at the 3-hour mark with the Surgeon General himself? Well, the way we do that is we strategically book time with him over 2 separate days between him being Surgeon General for Barack Obama and being Surgeon General for President Joe Biden. You're supposed to say president whenever you say Barack Obama, right? I just said Barack Obama like he was a guy I knew. No, he's like between presidents, he was kind of not the Surgeon General for a while, and that's when we caught up with him when he was down hanging out with his parents in Miami. And today, we are swooping around all over the place. Today, we're going to go to the suburbs of Austin, Texas, and we are going to talk to Mr. Louis Sachar. So who is Louis Sachar? Well, Louis was born in East Meadow, New York in 1954, kind of grew up there, and then they moved over to the West Coast, growing up in California, Orange County. Liked school, was a good student, but wasn't until high school that he really became an avid reader when he started falling into the works of people like J.D. Salinger, Kurt Vonnegut, etc. And after high school, he went to college in Ohio, but sadly, in his first semester, his father died, and he moved back home to California to be with his mom. Later on, after some time had passed, he re-enrolled in college, this time at Berkeley. And one day, after trudging to school, he saw the strange sight of a small girl, like an elementary school child, handing out flyers. And he's like, what is this girl selling? What could an 8-year-old girl be selling on the sidewalk? So he picks up a flyer, and the flyer says, help, we need teachers' aides at our school. Earn 3 units of college credit. He's like, I could earn college credit just by like hanging out in a school. I don't get any homework. I don't have any term papers. I don't have any tests. All I have to do is help out like a 2nd grade class. So he signed up. And in addition to helping out in the classroom outside of his college credits, he also became the noontime supervisor, and he was known as Louis the yard teacher. He was inspired by that experience, this is now the kind of mid to late 70s, that he then took his hand at writing a book called Sideways Stories from Wayside School, where he played the role of Louis the yard teacher in the book, and every single child in the book is named after one of the kids that he watched at the local public school. Now, the book didn't kind of come out to like wide acclaim and make a big splash. Instead, what happened was he went back to law school, and he published the book and it came out, but no fanfare, didn't sell, nothing. He worked as a lawyer for almost 10 more years, still writing children's books in his evenings and weekends and spare time. And suddenly, around 1989, the books began selling, and he was able to stop practicing law and dedicate himself to writing books full time. Well, I'm glad he did. You're probably glad he did too. You know why? Because Louis is now the author of over 25 children's books, including the 1998 U.S. National Book Award winner for young people's literature. That would be the book Holes, Holes, not W at the beginning. You might know it because it's turned into a big, gigantic, multi-million-dollar movie. And that also won the 1999 Newbery Medal for the year's most distinguished contribution to American literature for children, and ranked 6th amongst all children novels in a survey published by School Library Journal. I was delighted, to say the least, to have a chance to talk to my childhood hero, the person who got me into reading, Mr. Louis Sachar, and we dialed him up from Austin, Texas. We are gonna talk about things like absurdity, wooing readers, drinking urine, literary heroes, celebrity culture, writing structure, the Shawshank Redemption, wrestling with doubt, and how to live a quiet life. I am thrilled and honored to welcome you in to Chapter 78 of 3 Books. Let us flip the page into the show now. Hi, Louis.
Hi, Neil.
Oh, it's so nice to connect with you. I am in Toronto, Canada. As you know, you are, if I'm not mistaken, down in Austin, Texas?
That's right.
Now, I've been to Austin so many times, and I know it's a city that is both weird and changing a lot. If I stepped outside of where you are, what do I see? Are we talking like farmlands, fields? Are you in a denser part of town?
Yeah, you're talking suburbia. A lot of Texas cities, Austin included, are very large in area. It takes a half an hour to get from one end to the other by car. And a lot of it is suburbs, which is where I am. We moved here for my daughter to go to school, and when she was 4 years old, and we've stayed ever since.
Beautiful. And she's up and out of the house, a zoologist, I think, as I understand it. And your roots are now settled, I guess.
Yes.
I was thrilled because not only did you agree to come on the show, but you also gave me your 3 most formative books. And I had a pleasure over the last few weeks reading 2 of them. I did not make it through the 3rd. I did not make it through one of them. I'll reveal that later, which one. And I'd love to jump in with you. And if you don't mind, I'll just say I'll overview the book, and I'll ask you to tell me about your relationship with it, and then we can kind of go from there.
Okay.
So, Louis, your first book is 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger. I am holding the small paperback in my hand, designed by J.D. Salinger himself, I understand. Top is navy blue, bottom is bright red. The sort of sweeping font says 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger on the front, nothing else. No burst, no claims, no bestseller, simple. The back says the same thing. This book was published in 1953 by Little Brown and Company, a division of Hachette now. It is 9 exceptional short stories from one of the greatest literary voices of the 20th century. These, I think 8 of them were published in the New Yorker beforehand, one of them in Harper's. J.D. Salinger lived from 1919 to 2010, and he was the American writer most famous for Catcher in the Rye. So with that little preamble, so our listeners can sort of picture holding this beautiful paperback in their hands, Louis, tell us about your relationship with 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger.
Well, it was the first book I read that opened my eyes to what reading could be, or my mind to what reading could be. I was in high school. It wasn't assigned by a class. This was in the 60s that I went to high school.
Where were you?
Yeah, I was in Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
And, you people remember the 60s for, lots of reasons. Drugs and music, but, social movements. But it was also, among the heroes of my generation were not just pop music, people like Bob Dylan and the Beatles and people like Martin Luther King, but also writers, people like J.D. Salinger and Kurt Vonnegut. And a friend of mine, I was like maybe 14 years old when I started reading this book, and I had a good friend in high school, and he was reading it as well. And I'd read these stories at home, and he would read them, and we'd talk about them, because with each story I'd finish and I'd really like it, but I'd wonder, what did I just read? Because so much was written between the lines, and so much was left unsaid in these stories that there was so much room for to ponder. I mean, there was one story that ended with this girl who couldn't throw away a chicken sandwich. I mean, and it was just kind of thrown in there at the end. And what did that mean? Why was that there? And plus the stories were incredibly engaging, funny, in their own kind of dry way. And yet I never quite understood what they said. So my friend and I would discuss them. And over the years, I've probably reread each of these 9 stories at least 9 times.
81 stories.
Yeah. And I remember, whenever I felt like I needed to get back to my roots of what I want, what I wanted to do as a writer, what I thought a writer should be, I would reread one of these stories.
Yeah, and for the listener, I had not read this book before. I'd seen it, and I'd read Catcher in the Rye for the first time. I should say shamefully, but we have one of our values on 3 Books, Louis, is no book shame, no book guilt. We have no book shame, no book guilt. Anybody can like any book anytime. We're just pro reading. I read Catcher in the Rye this year, like for the first time ever. And then the follow-up for me was 3 or 4 months later. You suggested I read 9 stories. The first story in this book, I emailed you after I read it. It's called, and I have it right in front of me. Oh my gosh, it's so striking. Perfect Day for Banana Fish. And it's taking place in a hotel in the 1950s, and there's this woman, and she's combing her hair inside the room, and a guy, presumably her husband, or maybe they're not married, you can't quite tell, he's on the beach, and he's like essentially flirting with a preteen or a very young girl. They go swimming together. You're like, is this guy a pedophile? What is going on here? What's going on? And then the girl has a conversation with her mother, and the mother's like, get rid of this guy. He's trouble. He's gonna kind of fall. He's gonna fall off the rails. And there's this like tense scene when he comes back to the room, and then the short story ends. I'm just gonna ruin this one. I won't ruin the other 8, but I just want the listener to get a sense of it. The short story ends with a very sudden and very abrupt. He grabs a gun and he shoots himself in the head. It is a stunning, surprising, overwhelming, emotionally like, whoa moment. And there's a suicide. I was not prepared for that. And this book shook me. I had to put the book down. I could not move. I lay like supine or whatever that word is on my bed. I was like, I was stunned. And I could not believe that these few pages of a short story literally froze me like that. These books are, there's a stunning quality. There's a absurdist, abrupt shockingness to some of these stories.
Right. And actually that character, Seymour Glass, the one who, commits suicide at the end of the story, J.D. Salinger wrote many of his books about the Glass family. His books, Franny and Zoe, are brother and sister of Seymour. And actually one of the other stories in this book, called Down at the Dinghy.
Yeah.
The woman in that story is a sister of Seymour's. So he spent a lot of time devoted to
the multiverse
or
of characters,
the Glass family.
It's interesting too. I want to draw a parallel, and I don't know if I'm drawing a real parallel here or if I'm just imagining it. When I read Sideways Stories from Wayside School, I had that same sense. Now I was also 8 years old, so it wasn't as shocking as what we just talked about. But when I read the essay, for those that have read Sideways Stories from Wayside School, and I bet you it's a lot of our listeners, because this is a listener of book lovers, people that are into books. It's 9 million copies sold, right? The Wayside School kind of series. People have read these books. Well, when I read the end of Sammy, 63, page 63, I'm flipping to it right now. I could read it almost word for word in my head. And it's a kid in the class that has stinky raincoats. And at the end, it's just like a dead rat. I was similarly caught off guard. Like, talk to me about this trust or this wooing or this relationship that you think Salinger may have had with the reader. But also, I recognize this in some of your work. What are you trying to do in terms of seducing the reader? How do you think about that, if you even think about that? Is the reader even present in your mind when you're writing? I'd love to understand that, because I had visceral reactions emotionally reading your stuff and reading this 9 stories, and I wanted to see if there was something there.
It's really hard to think of what I think of the reader when I'm writing. I don't think of certainly don't think of millions of readers when I'm writing. I'm writing for one reader who's partly myself, partly a young kid who, if you don't keep him engaged or her engaged at any moment, will put down the book because they're bored. But also a very discriminating reader who will see through any cheap trick I might try or, compromise I might make to in the story. So, and as far, I remember, I don't think about this much now when I'm writing, but I remember when I first started writing children's books, I remember thinking that my goal was to bring the same love to reading that I get out of the authors I love. So maybe that's where, the fact that you can see the similarities between how you react to J.D. Salinger and how you as a kid reacted to Sideways Stories, that's exactly what I was trying to do.
Well, that's beautiful. I'm so glad to see this parallel, because it's like amazing. And you do that so masterfully. You do that in Holes. You do that in I dare say all your books. There's a you can't wait to flip your books, Louis, because you're like, I don't know what's going to be on the next page. And that excitement, maybe the young kid, and I have a young boy who didn't like to read inside me too. That is something that I think I've maybe people accuse me of like low attention span stuff, but I'm like, no, I'm trying to get someone interested in flipping that page. I want to come back to something you said a few minutes ago, though. You said when, in the 60s, not only were the politicians the heroes and the musicians the heroes, the writers were the heroes, like J.D. Salinger and Kurt Vonnegut you mentioned. when I pick up an old book in a bookstore, I am struck by the sort of grandiosity that the author had. Big pictures. You heard about feuds, whether that's Norman Mailer writing a scathing article about, Hunter S. Thompson, or, there's like these literary feuds and wars. And there's like this big, larger than life literary hero. And like, talk to me about that today. Have we lost that? Is that my imagination? Do we have the capacity to build that back up again? How do we create a culture where people who write books are, and they certainly are on this podcast, so we're pushing for this, but they're brought back into the zeitgeist a bit more, or has the shark jumped over to YouTube and we can't get it back? Like, talk to me about attention spans, the world today, and the sort of literary hero.
Well, attention spans definitely aren't what they used to be, myself included. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it takes to make literary heroes. I think there are some. I don't know. I think it just depends on the quality of the writing. I mean, we have celebrity heroes and pop and singer heroes.
It's a fuller world today. Like, there isn't just 10 big writers and 10 big movies and 10 big music. It's like there's not a top 40 anymore. There's Spotify with 10 million songs. Right. Maybe there's just this huge fragmentation that's happened. So nobody can be a mountain anymore because there's just a ton of small hills everywhere.
Maybe. Or maybe, in the 60s, there was a lot of movements. I mean, there was a huge upheaval in everything. And people like, in the music world, people like Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, among others, were leaders of that movement. And so were people like Kurt Vonnegut, Joseph Heller. J.D. Salinger was a little bit before that, but he was still an icon. But it was all part of this baby boom generation. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure we have that today. I mean, currently we've got this Black Lives Matter movement that is, but it doesn't have the same. I mean, as important as it is and as universal as it's becoming, it's still not as big as the anti-war movement, where people's lives were where everyday people were on the lives, not just, one segment of society. We didn't have the new discovery of, marijuana felt like a new discovery to my generation. Mm-hmm. And it's
legal where I live.
Yeah. And now there are lots of drugs, and they're all much stronger than it used to be when it was first becoming part of the counterculture. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, people were all there was this sense of in it together. Mm-hmm. The Beatles,
community connection.
Yeah, the Beatles were part of it. They didn't necessarily feel like they were leaders in a way, but they were also, you felt like they were swept up in it, and they were marching along. They were alongside you. Hmm. And now there's more of a distinction between celebrity and follower.
To the point where we actually articulate it using those words, right? Like it's those words have become monetizable and commercializable, and I'm using words that aren't even words, but like those are actual like metrics now that people apply to their business and their career. And in the author world that we live in, there is pressure from a publisher. I don't know if you experience it the same way I do, but, to grow your platform and to, communicate with your people. It's like, yeah, I find that distasteful. I don't like celebrity culture. We go out of our way on 3 books to interview people from all walks of life and all stripes. And we're trying our best to get off of celebrity culture. But yeah, we live in a world where it's like, how many followers do you have? Because I need to know if you're worth paying attention to. And I need to know if you're worth my time to follow you. And it's an ugly, I feel like it's an ugly place to be, personally.
Yeah, I'm not part of that. I'm not on Facebook. Well, actually, my daughter runs a Facebook page for me, but I don't care about celebrity culture.
At the same time, though, we need, a way to disseminate story. Maybe it's the celebrity culture, by the way, that caused J.D. Salinger to become very well known as a recluse. So for those that don't know, Salinger essentially disappeared from the public eye for huge swaths of his life, decades. He quit writing,
there was always rumors that he was still writing, just wasn't publishing. And when he died, I forget when that was.
2010.
Yeah, there was, he has a huge following, and everyone was expecting there to be this great treasure trove of unpublished manuscripts.
And it's gone so far, whereas now his son and daughter and the holders of his estate have said there is 15 novels written completely.
Oh, there are?
But that's what they said. But they said that it's going to take us time and effort to go through them, to parse, to figure out what to publish, to figure out what not to edit them. So give us time and space. There's a huge, apparently, trove of his work. And also, perhaps more controversially, his daughter, he had 2 kids, a son and a daughter with his second wife. He's married 3 times. And the daughter wrote an expose, kind of memoir about living with him. And she talks about how he used to speak in tongues and he used to drink his own urine and he would switch religions every few months. And he came across as an extremely eccentric character, to which his son replied, she must have been growing up in a different house. Huh. But one of his ex-wives also wrote an exposing memoir, which also painted him as a very, very strange, eccentric, the drinking of the urine has come up a couple times, and really sort of eccentric behaviors. And you wonder if, you can kind of feel that in some of the stories. They're so wild and so out there. But I wonder if it's an aversion to that celebrity culture that he felt. And I also wonder, and this is I would love to toss this back to you here, is it possible to live like that now? Can we live off the grid? To what level? I love that you said you don't really do any of that. That's admirable from my perspective. How do you live a quiet life today? Is that even possible? And how do you do it?
I pretty much do it. I do have a website, but and I get fan mail and I answer the fan mail and I try to answer all the posts on my website. But for the most part, I don't think of myself as a celebrity. I don't, it's almost like there's two me's. Every once in a while and I used to do this a lot more often than I do now, when I would go and give a talk somewhere or do a book signing, and I meet thousands of fans who love my work. But for most of my time, I just deal with everyday things. The
same inane dribble of life that we all deal with.
Yeah, it's only the hour or 2 hours a day when I'm writing. And then maybe, when I occasionally do, speaking engagements that I become this other person.
And that's really interesting to me too, because 9 Stories, was written before Catcher in the Rye, right? Catcher in the Rye, his big, huge magnum opus, the great American novel. It was after that he didn't really kind of produce as much, although it came out afterwards in this form of the book because it was written in the New Yorker articles or New Yorker short stories. And then there's this gigantic weight he has in his life. And I hear in your comment just now, just a tremendous amount of humility. I'm a regular guy. I don't think of myself as a celebrity. I get off the stage of talking to thousands of adoring fans, and it doesn't go into the part of your brain that thinks you're worth that, or that you sort of internalize that into your sort of psyche kind of more long term. So I'm asking this question, then you were able to follow up Sideways Stories with not just sequels, but wholes, and other books that have increased up the ratchet of complexity and scale and popularity, certainly. Is that something we can be taught? Do you go into a different headspace when you think about following up success, or is it just like hardwired into you, Louis, that you're like, even after Holes turns into a multi-million blockbuster movie, do you like, whatever, I'll work on my next book for me? How do you separate the commercial success from what you do next? And how do you avoid that from weighing on you in any way, good or bad?
It took a while after Holes. There wasn't instant commercial success with Sideways Stories. That took about, I finished writing it in 1978, I think, or 77. And it wasn't until the mid 80s that it finally started getting some notice. So I would just, like, as I kind of previously alluded to, I'd write for an hour or two every morning and just do a little each day, and then go on with the other part of my life. After Holes, after all that success, and the movie was a lot of fun and thrilling to work on.
And just a little perspective for listeners that don't know, Louis, Holes, winner of the Newbery Medal, winner of the National Book Award, 4,400 ratings on Amazon, and in the top few hundred kind of permanently, number one New York Times bestseller for years and years and years. Like, this is a gigantic book. So this came out, which year was it, 2000?
I think it was 99.
99.
And then the movie came out in 2003. Which
I'm sure ratcheting it up to a different kind of elevation, right? Then how did you take me? Now, I just want to give that to the listener that doesn't know Holes. Now take me back into your mental processing of it. So,
the book I wrote after Holes was called Small Steps, and it was about just, taking the small steps necessary to get something done and to, achieve success. It followed one of the other characters in Holes, but that's basically what I was trying to, do myself. I was trying, Holes was great, but now I need to return to the small steps of writing. I don't know how successfully I was able to do that. It took me a while to write Small Steps. And it was hard not to think, and it still is, as I write each book now, to try, it's difficult to think, okay, I'm not trying to write anything super successful. I'm just trying to return to my roots and do what I do as a writer. And hopefully it'll reach a lot of people.
But interesting that you even say that. Hopefully it will reach a lot of people. That's still part of your brain. I mean, not to say it shouldn't be. It's certainly in my brain. But I just wondered if even that part sticks around or if that goes away. Hopefully it'll reach a lot of people.
It's still there. That's definitely still there. I still have doubts when I'm writing. It's still a struggle with each book. And I'm still trying to get that reader to turn the page.
Love that. Louis, thank you so much for opening up some of the contextual side of 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger. I loved listening to you. Your stories are just hitting me hard, especially because of the relationship I've had with your work for so many years of my life. I'd love to transition now to your second book, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I am holding it in my hands. It is also one of my favorite books. I went out to the bar I want to say 3 years ago, and I ended up chatting with a stranger beside me about what his favorite book was. And he told me it was East of Eden by John Steinbeck. He pulled down the collar of his shirt, and over his clavicle area, he had the tree roots of the cover of the book tattooed on his body. When he did that, the bartender ran over and she said, "Oh my God, no way." She pulled up her shirt sleeve. She had a quote from the book, the same book, on her forearm. I'm in downtown Toronto. 2 people who I don't know, who don't know each other, have tattoos of this book. There is a bookstore open till midnight. in Toronto. I go to that bookstore, I buy a used copy, and I'm holding it in my hand. It is indeed East of Eden, the magnum opus of John Steinbeck, published in 1952 by the Viking Press, which was ultimately bought by Penguin in 1975. So today's division of Penguin Random House. The cover is a sort of a scuffed cream color with East of Eden written in white on a gray rectangle in the center of a pen and ink drawing of the famous dead, twisted, gnarled tree branch across the top. The bottom simply says John Steinbeck. And he is, of course, the Nobel Prize-winning American author who lived from 1902 to sadly only 1968. The plot, quickly, is set in the rich farmland of California's Salinas Valley. Salinas Valley? Salinas, thank you. This sprawling and often brutal novel follows the intertwined destinies of two families whose generations helplessly reenact the fall of Adam and Eve and the poisonous relationship of Cain and Abel. Oh, it takes my breath away even to talk about this book. Louis, tell me about your relationship with East of Eden by John Steinbeck.
Yeah, my memory of this, I've read this book twice now, though the last time was probably at least 15 years ago, if not longer. And so I actually don't remember it all that well, except that it's just how sweeping it was in its scope and its ambition, and how moving it was, how insightful it was. And as with J.D. Salinger, I've liked everything by John Steinbeck that I've read. I'm curious about that cover of yours. I'm holding one that I got in a used bookstore as well, and in pencil, which I don't believe on the opening page it says first edition, and then the price was $3.66 that I paid for it.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, mine's $27.
Yeah, so I kind of doubt it's a first edition. Doesn't have that, but it doesn't have that picture you said on that yours has on it.
Yeah,
and I don't know. Is yours a paper jacket or the jacket or
yeah. Steinbeck Centennial Edition. It's paperback. I did buy it used, and it's the version I most commonly see. Although now in bookstores, there's also the Penguin Classics version, which is kind of the bright orange and white, sort of looking like all the other Penguin books. And then when I went online to research the book before chatting with you, I sure enough see a whole variety of covers, and the one I'm holding, I know for sure, is not the original color. It's the Steinbeck Centennial Edition, which is published kind of.
Mine is simply a kind of a greenish color. It says East of Eden, John Steinbeck on it. It's a hardcover book. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, no. My edition's 2002, so you have a much more interesting version of it. This book, there's a lot to say about it. I thought I'd maybe pick out a quote that struck me as I was reading it, and I want to just read it to you, Louis, for your reflection. Page 54 in chapter 7. Time interval is a strange and contradictory matter in the mind. It would be reasonable to suppose that a routine time or an eventless time would seem interminable. It should be so, but it is not. It is the dull, eventless times that have no duration whatsoever. A time splashed with interest, wounded with tragedy, crevassed with joy, that's the time that seems long in the memory. And this is right when you think about it. Eventlessness has no posts to drape duration on. From nothing to nothing is no time at all.
That's very interesting. I mean, it's you can see in there the enjoyability of reading him, but I also, as an author, kind of see a little trick in there too. One of the hardest things as an author is getting to the good parts of the story, of going, well, how do I get from here to there? And, without just, skipping, how do I skip all this time to get from here to there? And I don't know, I don't remember the book well enough to know if that's what he was doing there. But my guess is that's what he was doing was his way of getting from one part of the story to the next without and getting through all the mundane things in between.
Take me into that a bit more. You write fiction. I write nonfiction. I'm not familiar with that feeling, but of course, as I read books, I totally recognize that as an author. Sometimes major plot points will be skipped or scenes will be omitted, and you can just get to the next chapter and there's a jump or a leap. And I kind of like that as a reader. Take me into that as an author. What do you mean you trying to skip to the good parts? How does that work in your writing process? What are you looking for in a book? This is still I'm holding it in my hands. It's got to be 601 pages. It wasn't like he was jumping too much.
No, but there's always this balance when you're writing of, a novel of how much of the day-to-day stuff do you say if it's not very interesting, and then how do you get past it when you need time for some plot point to develop, but nothing really interesting happens during that time, at least as part of your story.
Yeah.
So that's always a trick. And one of the things I've realized is that the reader doesn't want to read the boring stuff any more than I want to write it. Mm. So he's with me. He wants me to find ways to get through it quickly, or she. And so that I just thought was an interesting philosophical way for John Steinbeck to relate with the reader, his thoughts on time and but also a way to, okay, let's get to the good stuff now.
Mm-hmm. And especially because this book, if I kept reading the introduction, and for people that don't know this book, and I highly recommend you read it, it's one of my favorite books of all time. It's my number one book of 2017, I believe it. And I in my monthly book club, it says here, East of Eden is where John Steinbeck created his most mesmerizing characters and explored the most enduring themes, and it's telling a story that takes place over 3 generations with dozens and dozens of characters. Right. So, even though it's 600 pages, well, that's a really short amount of time to tell the story of 3 generations in the lives of dozens of people. So he still makes it move at a clip. And that foxtrot or that pace is, that's partly why someone with a shorter attention span like me could read a 600-page book, because it moves, it flies.
Yeah, and there's, I think with all the 3 books I've chosen, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I find just something very comforting in the author's voice, and also there's no wasted words either. So you're happy to just go with the author in all these books. I just want to mention, it's also, East of Eden is a great movie as well, one of James Dean's few movies. And I was surprised. I think I'd seen the movie before I read the book, and I was surprised when I read the book that the movie doesn't take place. You mentioned 3 generations. The movie is like the last 80 pages of the book.
No way.
Yeah, it's just the final generation. And it's a tremendous movie, and I'm glad. I'm glad they didn't try to do the whole book, because that would have just it would have gone too. They wouldn't have been able to devote the proper time to each part.
Is it besides Holes, were any other of your books turned into movies?
No.
And so I guess if you don't mind, I know there's the experience of Holes and it's a huge success. What is the little model of questions or the little principles to follow when thinking about how to turn book to movie? You mentioned in East of Eden, they chopped 520 pages out of it. I guess that's one way to do it. But did you develop, were you surprised to learn, was there insights you gleaned from that process that'd be interesting from a sort of principle or structure standpoint of how you do that?
I'm not sure. It was just, people often ask, well, what was it like seeing your book come to life? And I never thought of it that way. My book is already alive as far as I'm concerned. The movie I treated the movie as something separate. And my goal was to make a good movie, not to make the book into a movie.
Yeah. You weren't trying to serve the book reading audience necessarily.
Yeah. I was trying to people who don't know the book. I just wanted to try to create something in the movie that people would get equally caught up in. Now, people tell me it's very close to the book, and they say, "Oh, no wonder." Now that I know you wrote the movie, no wonder. And I'm sure there's a lot of truth to that, but that wasn't what I was trying to accomplish. It was just to make a good movie.
What an interesting topic for us as a 3 Books podcast. Listeners, if you are picking up on this, give me a call 1-833-READ-A-LOT. What is your favorite book to movie where the author was personally involved? Until this conversation about Holes, you know what would have come to my mind, Louis, is actually Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Roald Dahl, and off that, I'm sure, well, I don't want to say I'm sure, but I'm guessing that you have some affinity towards as well, like I do and like millions of people do. He wrote the movie script of the original, Gene Wilder movie of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But when you watch it, as I did recently with my kids, it's hugely different. There is entirely new. The whole thing begins in a different place from a different perspective. And it's just wonderful to think, Roald Dahl thought that would work better as an opening. Roald Dahl thought that would never work on screen. And I just like the exploration of that. I wish we could ask him as we're asking you. But hearing just the idea, which I'm sensing from him as well, I wanted to make a good movie. Like that alone is a nice separation because, as you know from like watching Lord of the Rings and stuff, like people are all about like, was it accurate to the book? That shouldn't necessarily be our question.
No. I also, just to add some reality to this, I mean, I don't know what happened with the making of that movie, and I think it's a good movie, but I was hired to write the movie for Holes, but I didn't have final say. There were a lot of, and fortunately, the director I worked with was willing to listen to me. But there are a lot of people involved, a lot of producers, a lot of the people who put up the money, and if they say no, we want it to begin this way, we want it to end this way, that is their decision. So I don't know how much of that, was Roald Dahl and how much of it was people who hired him.
It's interesting you say that because I've often wondered about that, and then, what a torturous process for a writer. I mean, even The Shawshank Redemption, when you read the book, by Stephen King, you're like, the guy Red is probably like a red-haired guy. In the movie, they make it like ironic because it's Morgan Freeman. You know what I mean? Like he plays the character of Red. And you're like, if you read the book first, like I did, you're like, that was an Irish dude. Like there's just no way it was a black guy. You just like wouldn't have expected that. But many hands in the kitchen and hopefully, it turns into a good film. But as you're saying, there's a release of what happened. So if the movie had bombed, you couldn't have internalized that either.
Right. In fact, there were times when I was writing a movie that I was very upset with some of the directions it was going. And actually, Small Steps, now that I remember, there were characters in the, Armpit and X-Ray are the main characters of Small Steps, and they were in Holes. Although, they weren't the lead by any chance, by any stretch of the imagination. But the initial concept when I first started Small Steps was Armpit and X-Ray seeing the movie and being so upset by it, how it wasn't true. It completely misrepresents them, and they then go. X-Ray tries to get Armpit to go with them to Hollywood to confront the director or the producer or whoever, and also to get their fair share of the money. Ended up not writing the book that.
Why? Why not? Because that sounds like a wonderful conceit. I'm curious what made you abandon it.
I got too metaphysical about the real armpit and the real X-ray going to, and also after a while.
Didn't want to trash a new Disney friends?
Well, at that point Disney wasn't involved, but also things changed and the movie started coming around to the way I envisioned it. So I didn't have as that kind of negative feeling towards it.
Yeah, I'm always curious, and I always look up what the author thinks of their own movie. It's fascinating to hear about when they hate it or when they love it. It's just, Chuck Palahniuk for Fight Club says, like, I couldn't have imagined a movie as good. But then you also hear about authors who are like, that was drivel and don't watch it, please. Let's move on to your third book now, and I'm so excited to get to this one. I am holding it in my hand. It is indeed The Princess Bride by William Goldman. Published in 1973 by Harcourt Brace. It was not made into the movie, the very famous movie, by Rob Reiner until 1987. So quite a long time after the book was written. And to continue our dialogue, William Goldman did write the screenplay, but he was not the director, even though he was also involved in movies. On the back, it says, beautiful flaxen-haired Buttercup has fallen for Wesley, the farm boy, and when he departs to make his fortune, she vows never to love another. When she hears that his ship has been captured by the dread pirate Roberts, who never leaves survivors, her heart is broken, but her charms draw the attention of the relentless Prince Humperdinck, who wants a wife and will go to any lengths to have Buttercup. So starts a fairy tale like no other, of fencing, fighting, torture, poison, true love, hate, revenge, giants, hunters, bad men, good men, beautifulest ladies, snakes, spiders, beasts, chases, escapes, lies, truths, passions, and miracles. This book you can file under 813.54 for 20th century fiction. William Goldman lived from 1931 to 2018. He was an American novelist, playwright, and screenwriter, also known for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and All the President's Men. Mr. Sacher, please tell us about your relationship with The Princess Bride by William Goldman. And don't worry at all about the phone in the background. We like background noise on the show.
Okay.
You can get it if you need to.
Well, no, I don't need to get it. My favorite part of the book isn't all that stuff you just mentioned. I mean, that's what's fun about the book, and what really makes it work for me, is it begins with the author saying this is the greatest book he'd ever read. Or actually, he said he'd never actually read it. And what we find out, and so for his 10th birthday, he finds an old copy in a used bookstore or to send to he's busy in Hollywood working on a movie, but he sends the book home, make sure the kid gets it for his 10th birthday. It's the best book he ever read when he was 10 years old, or, for all the reasons that you had just stated, that, the adventure and the love and the miracles and all that. He comes home from his Hollywood stint and asks his son, how much didn't you just love the book? And, his son says, yeah, it was great. And what about this part? And his son says, oh yeah, that was great. And what about that part? Oh yeah, that was great. And it doesn't take too long for really realize his son never read the book. And he's, very disappointed in him. And then he goes and picks up the book and finds that it's incredibly boring, full of all kinds, page after page of supposedly literary great, satire, but incredibly boring to everyone else, except for, people who study this kind of stuff. And it turns out that when he was 10 years old, his father or whoever it was who read it to him skipped all those parts, and just read the good parts. And so the idea of this book is now William Goldman editing that book and bringing you just the good parts version. And so he
to the point where in the book, it's actually, after that, what you just talked about, we're talking like 20, 30, 40 pages into this thing, is he then introduces the good parts version of the book before we even get to any of the stuff I read on the back.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
like a really bizarre conceit to keep, I don't know why I'm using that word so much, but again, a totally meta format.
Right. And part of the fun is William Goldman's comments on the stuff he has gotten rid of, and now here's, and then bringing you the good parts. And the good parts, I reread this book prior to our podcast, and the good parts live up to all the hype. There's some really great scenes. There's this duel where our hero is having a sword fight with the greatest sword fighter in the world. And the greatest sword fighter in the world, they're on the cliffs of insanity or something there to that effect. And basically, the greatest sword fighter in the world is toying with him because he's so bored with fighting, with sword fighting. He's so much better than everyone else that we find out that he's fighting left-handed just to make it interesting to himself. And so just when he seems like he's about to be defeated by our hero, he says, by the way, I'm actually right-handed. And he switches hands and gains the advantage. And he's just about to kill our hero, and our hero then admits, well, I'm actually right-handed as well. And he switches to his right hand. And the battle ensues. And, there's great, they're great battles. They're funny. And, it's, so, you've got that interspersed with this ironical humor of the author brings us when he's talking about how, the book in general and what he's had to take out of it. I was a little disappointed. The ending didn't quite live up to the hype. And it was too much, I thought, too much of, William Goldman kind of looking at it and from his present day perspective and commenting on it rather than coming up with a great ending for the tale that he's supposedly reading and telling. But
and Louis,
it was a great book, I thought.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, this is the only one of the three I mentioned at the beginning. I did not make it through because the introduction was totally bowled me over. I'd seen the movie years ago and I was like, what am I reading? Like I was totally stymied, whatever that word is. I was stuck in it. I was like, I couldn't figure it out. And I'm like 20, 30, 40 pages in and it got time to interview you so I didn't. But knowing that that's what happened and sort of flipping through it, I can't wait to properly revisit this. I noticed it came out in 1973. Many years before the movie was made, although he says right in the intro, if you're reading this book, I guarantee it's because you saw the movie and loved it. Like he says that right in the opening.
Not in my copy.
Okay, in my more later my later copy. And you were about 20 years old, I think, at the time. Sideways Story, if I'm not mistaken, came out around 1980, kind of in your mid to late 20s, after law school and so on. Did you read the book kind of in that middle? It seems like to me another thread line, if the time works out, like again, absurd, meta. Sideways Story was like, again, surprising. It was the first book I read that like talked to me, where the character of Louis, the art teacher, is of course you, the author, like totally meta. The end of the book, again, in Sideways, is talking about me, the reader. Like, did you read it to influence you that way, or am I just seeing things again?
No, I think it influenced me. It's, like J.D. Salinger, William Goldman's, especially like that long introduction that you talked about, that I think is the best part of the book. It brings you, it makes the author your friend in a way. I mean, there's a line in Catcher in the Rye where Holden Caulfield talks about how some books that he really likes, they're good books, and other books he wants to call the author up after he finishes reading them. He feels like he's made a friend, and I think that's how William Goldman is to me when I read his books.
And that's how your books are to me and many others. It's something I aspire for, and I know I aspire for that because of how I got that from you. Making the author your friend, Louis Sachar, thank you so much for coming on 3 Books.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Hey everybody, it is just me, just Neil again, hanging out in my basement, listening back to the wonderful and wise Louis Sachar. So much in there, especially for writers, aspiring writers. People kind of want to take their thumb. Didn't you love how humble he was? I mean, this guy has sold millions and millions and millions of books by any metric of success. He's a huge, huge author, but he's just so down to earth, so humble, so self-effacing. It is just so inspiring to listen to. Thank you so much to Louis Sachar for giving us 3 more books to add to our top 1,000. For those that are new, if you head on over to 3books.co/the top 1,000, you will find a list of every single formative book mentioned on the show, including number 770, 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger. Number 769, East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I loved both of those 2 books, by the way. And number 768, The Princess Bride by William Goldman. Thank you so much to you for listening. Thank you so much to Louis for coming on the show. Take care, everybody. And now, are you still here? Did you make it past the 3-second pause? If so, I'd like to welcome you back to the end of the podcast club. Yes, this is one of 3 clubs that we have for 3 Books listeners, including the Cover to Cover Club. That's people that listen to every single chapter of the show from 1 to 333. And of course, the secret club members. I can't say more about that other than you got to call our phone number. You got to call our phone number for clues. Our phone number, of course, is 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Give us a call anytime. And let's start off the end of the podcast club as we always do by going to the phones.
Hi, Neil. This is Cassie Hager. I am calling from Kelowna, British Columbia. It is a beautiful day, and I am just out walking my dog. I just wanted to say how much I love your podcast. I'm in a quest to become part of the Cover to Cover Club, and I really appreciate how you make these really special connections and make it feel like I know the authors who are on your show, and I know your guests, and every time I walk past my community-free library, I'm always excited to see if there's an author's name in there that I recognize now from having them be on your show. So I just picked up a book by David Sedaris. I've never read any of his works before, and I'm really excited to dive into it. Just wanted to leave you that message. And thanks so much for the podcast. And it makes my day. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much to Kathy from Kelowna for calling our phone number. Kelowna, BC. You would think because I'm Canadian, I would know where Kelowna, BC is or have been there, but I actually don't, which is embarrassing. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm like, Kelowna, BC. I'm like, of course, it's a city I've heard of so much, but it kind of is no wonder I haven't been there, I guess, because it's the 7th largest city in British Columbia. So, Vancouver's number 1, Victoria's number 2. British Columbia is the westernmost province of Canada, but it's the largest in the interior. So when you look at Kelowna on a map, it's like inside. It's not on the edges or the coast where kind of most of the cities are. It's inside. It's way down in the middle of the thing. I guess it's a mountainous kind of more, is it mountains or is it rainforest? What's going on in the interior of BC? So I was like, I got this globe beside me. I was like, I got to find the latitude and longitude friends. Remember back in chapter 75 with George Saunders, we talk about latitude friends and longitude friends. So I was like, okay, this is going to help everyone picture it. Okay, it's a town of 125,000 people or so inside British Columbia. Longitude friends are Reno, Nevada, Yosemite National Park, Fresno, California, and a lot of water. But seriously, guys, it also is longitude friends with Easter Island. I was also shocked when I hit that island. Like, pretty much, you're directly above Easter Island. Did you know that, Kathy? Latitude friends, I get those things confused, latitude, longitude. I might have messed those up. Latitude friends are Paris, France, Munich, Germany, and Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, unfortunately just above the tip of the top of Japan. So we go straight into the sea from there. You got lots of latitude and longitude friends. Who are your latitude and longitude friends? Who's got the same latitude and longitude as you? I find that interesting to think about. I don't know why. Maybe because I've been so stuck in my house for so long that I'm starting to try to form kinship with people in different and unique ways. Kathy, a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining the Cover to Cover Club. Great to have you on board for the whole journey. And you're in for a treat. David Sedaris. Oh, I'm jealous. I am jealous. I think I have read every single David Sedaris book, although I have not bought his new one because I think it's just a collection of every other book. But maybe I should still get it because I'm almost nearing a whole David Sedaris shelf on my bookshelf. We got issues at home, by the way, Kathy, me, and Leslie. My bookshelf is exploding. I'm doing piles on the floor. It's spewing itself everywhere. I'm talking about putting in new bookshelves. Leslie's not super keen on more bookshelves. Anyway, we're having a dilemma here. Of course, I'm trying to prune it regularly. Thank you so much for the call, Kathy. As always, any call I play on the show or any letter I read on the show, drop me a line. I'm happy to mail you a signed book to say thanks for your love. Okay, now let's head over to the letter of the chapter. You know what? For a funny treat, I think I'm going to do the letter in the form of a text message. Okay, in the form of a text message. I was texting with our old pal from Chapter 7, Mr. Vishwas Agarwal. And, he's like, how are things? How's the new baby? And I was like, the new baby's great. Here's a picture. I sent him a picture. I don't really post pictures anywhere of the kids, but, text a friend. Sure. He writes back. So I'm going to read you his text back. This is Vish's text back in a text. I got his permission to share it, and it'll be the letter of the show from Vish. Okay. Here we go. Here's the text back. Smiley face emoji with stars for the eyes. Wow, ... He is so cute, ... Smiley face emoji with the streamer coming out of its mouth. ×3. Smiley face with the streamer. Smiley face with the streamer. Is that what you call those things? The birthday thing that you blow? Streamer? That's not the right word. What do you blow at a birthday party? You know what I'm talking about? Clap emoji, clap emoji, clap emoji, clap emoji, clap emoji. I can see a new TED Talk rock star has arrived. Neil, tighten up. We have got some tough competition here now. ... Smiley face emoji, smiley face emoji, smiley face emoji. Can you hear Vish's voice in that text? I could. I mean, his emoji game is strong. He's dabbling in 5 different kinds of emojis. I'm not quite there yet, people. Are you one of those people? You got the 7 different emojis going on the text messages? I don't know. It's a little over my head, but Vish, you rule. We love you. Thanks so much for the letter of the chapter. Okay, and now we are going over to the word of the chapter, people. And for this chapter's word, let's head back to Mr. Louis Sachar.
And the good parts live up to all the hype.
Yes, indeed, it is hype.
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 HYPE, hype. As Louis said, the good parts live up to all the hype. I thought I knew what this word meant, but then when I checked our friends at Merriam-Webster, it turns out that the word hype has 5 definitions. I'm betting, well, if you're anything like me, you knew maybe a couple of them, but maybe not all of them. 5 definitions. Number 1, slang for a narcotics addict. Okay, probably because of the short form from a hypodermic. Number 2, that was the number 1 definition, by the way. That's the first definition, a hype. You ever called someone that? You're a hype. You're a narcotics addict. I don't think I have. Number 2, a verb. The first one's a noun. Second one's a verb. It means stimulate or enliven, usually used with up. For example, hyping herself up for the game. Number 3, Leslie just walked by. She waves to all of you. She says hi to everybody. 3, hype, a verb. To mean put on or deceive, like to promote or to publicize extravagantly, hyping this fall's TV lineup. Okay, that maybe is what Louis meant. How about this one? No, maybe he meant number 4, the second noun, a deception, a put on, or publicity. especially the promotional publicity of an extravagant or contrived kind. All the hype before the boxing match. Yeah, okay, that's probably what I meant. The fourth definition lives up to all the hype, lives up to all the excess promotional publicity of the extravagant or contrived kind. And number 5, an adjective. The adjective slipped at the end. Do you know what an adjective is? I don't think I do. It means excellent or cool. Okay, it's slang for excellent. There's 5 definitions of hype. Narcotics addict, stimulate or enliven, put on or deceive, deception or put on, publicity, excellent, cool. This is a lot of words. This is a lot of this word has a lot of uses, is what I'm saying. It's like a spatula in your kitchen. You know, you use it to get out all the peanut butter, use it to wipe stuff off the counter, use it to like slather stuff into your mouth. That spatula is very functional. The word hype is very functional. Weird metaphor, I know. If you head over to Etymology Online, it turns out 1967 American English, the verb comes from 1937, excessively misleading publicity or advertising. That's the word. That's the form that Louis used it in, probably in a back part formation of the word hyperbole. Interesting that it comes from both hypodermic and hyperbole. Also interesting that hyperbole doesn't sound like hype, right? We talked about that before. And it is that itself from an underworld slang of the word hype, to swindle by overcharging or shortchanging. That comes from 1926, which itself is a back formation from the word hyper, which was actually a noun meaning a short-change con man in the 1914 era, which itself was from the prefix hyper, which means over or to excess. Scientific term at the root of it, hyper, to mean over or excess, turned into a short-change comment in the 1914s, turned into short-changing and overcharging in the 1920s, turned into hyperbole in 1937, turned into excessively misleading publicity or advertising in the 1960s. What an adventurous life this word has had. And by the way, if you're wondering, well, what about before the 1910s? It wasn't used. It just wasn't used. I went and checked out Google Trends because I was curious, because I'm a weird word nerd like you guys, and no one used this word until poof. In the 20th century, it went boom. Now hype is everywhere, literally. Speaking of hype, I hope that this show has lived up to the hype that I gave it at the beginning. I enjoyed, as I always do, my conversations with all of you. Me coming out of the left here, Louis coming out of the right here, us hanging out together. Thank you so much for going on this pilgrimage with me, and I will see y'all on the new moon. I will see y'all on the full moon. Until next time, remember that you are what you eat, and you are what you read. Thanks so much for listening. Keep turning that page, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.